So my name is Don Wood. I'm a retired IT executive, worked for Computer Science Corporation for about 25 years. My wife is a project manager for Lockheed Martin. My son died of an overdose. He was 32 years old. It was last March, so it's been about 15 months, so it's pretty raw. So bear with me, I'm sure you'll appreciate that. And at times it's difficult to say certain things. I speak, I'm part of the State's Attorney's Office has a Speakers Bureau. It's Speak Up and Save a Life. We work, and I also participate in the Collaboration Council in Betty's group. But I've spoken to a number of organizations, high schools. I spoke at Magruder High School, which is where my son went, and I had the senior and junior class. I spoke at Damascus. Young people, a lot of parents groups, so it's a great initiative that the State's Attorney's Office has where they go out and engage all these different groups so we can spread the message and alert all the parents. So my messages to parents are, one, it can happen to anyone. It can happen to any family across the board, and I can give you example after example of the families that this has happened to. And two, you need to educate yourself so that you're aware of what's going on out there, and not only so that you're aware that you can watch for the behavior and understand maybe some things that are going on with your children. My son was a functioning addict, and it threw us for the longest time because we kept dealing with his behavior, his bad behavior, without realizing addiction was driving the behavior for so long. And even though he was arrested a number of times with marijuana or different things, it was more, okay, that's just behavior, he's not really addicted, because you deny that. And we were in denial for the longest time. As I said, this can happen to any family. You have to educate yourself, but also your children. There's nothing in the schools to educate them about addiction, about the brain on addiction, about drugs. Where they're learning anything about pills is from their friends and what they're doing. They're also learning from the internet. I'll give you an example. I went on the internet and I wanted to understand the different addictive qualities between Percocet and Vicodin and heroin and the rank order of those and what about them. The first thing that came up on Google was a search that described that, but also it was a blog of users that were describing if you have a Percocet pill, what's the best way to get high? How can you use Vicodin to get high? What if it's time release? How can you get that off the pill so you can snort it? And there was different ways that he suggested you take this to get high. But that's what is available to the young people. So the parents have to arm themselves. You have to understand that you have to educate yourself. My son died, as I said. I found him, he was living in a sober house. He had battled addiction. He was trying to stay clean. But he wasn't having much success, and he died of an overdose of pills. And I found him, he had been dead 12 to 14 hours, and it's not a pretty sight, which is why I do this. No young person should die that way. So our life, it was the third death that we had experienced within 8 weeks. And beginning in January, a young man named Alex Benzel, this is on Bethesda Magazine, if anyone can go back and you can look at this thing, this is Renee Benzel, this is a friend of ours. We found out that her son had died of an overdose of heroin. We were shocked because he can't believe that family would have anything to do with drugs, any of this. We knew these young men. They grew up with our sons. How could that be? Well, if you have an addict in the family and you don't talk about it, it's a stigma. You don't want anybody to know that. There's always the hope that maybe they can get better, maybe, so you don't want that stigma attached. I mean, that's the hope of the parent of an addict, that someday they're going to find their way and be clean. So you don't talk about it. So we never knew that was going on. We went to the funeral, we went to the wake, and 4 weeks after that, another young man had died. His name was Casey Ryan, and he was friends with Alex. They didn't do drugs together. My sons knew them as well, and 4 weeks after that, my son died. So within 8 weeks, we lost 3 young men. They were 32, 28, and 26. Their problems all started in high school or middle school, and now in middle school, it's really bad. It may have been bad before, but it's even worse, and they're dealing with marijuana and alcohol in middle school. And if you look at the progression of drugs, marijuana and alcohol, unfortunately, are too socially acceptable in our world today. And it's a battle that we have had for a long time. But I don't know anybody that's gone on to heroin or cocaine or any of the other drugs. It didn't start with marijuana and alcohol. And cigarettes are in there too. Cigarettes, marijuana, alcohol, and then the pills. And you know, our family, one of the things that we've done is educate ourselves after my son's death, unfortunately. And now we understand. Now we can look back and see the whole progression of everything, and that way back when, and when he was in high school, the things he was doing, there were so many warning signs that we did not catch, because he was very good at what he did, and that's what addicts do. They're very good at lying, manipulating, but their brain has changed, so that's why they do that. If you look at our family growing up, we grew up in Olney, Maryland. We were engaged with our sons. My son was an altar boy, and he went to church. He got good grades. We played all the sports, so my 3 boys played all the sports. I look at all the times I spent standing on the sidelines of my son's practices. On weekends, we were spending our time driving around Montgomery County with the boys, all the games they had. Look at all the time I spent doing that, and I spent 0 time understanding addiction and understanding anything about it. He got good grades. He played quarterback in high school. He ran track in high school. At the same time, he was into drugs and alcohol with the rest of the young people. And that's what you don't understand is this just teenage behavior, the kind of things teenagers do? Well, in today's world, you can't just assume that. You have to assume that there's more of a problem there. There's a bigger problem than just that behavior, that it's not just teenage behavior. Because if you're doing marijuana and alcohol at these parties, I guarantee it, in today's world, there's pills there. There are so many pills out there in the United States right now. I mean, the numbers are staggering. I think in the whole world, I think 80% of the opiate pills are in the United States. More people die of addiction in general than last year than died of automobile accidents and violent gun deaths. I mean, if you add those two together, more people died of addiction. And the biggest part of that, and the growing part of that now, is the opiates and the pills that are available out there everywhere. So what is addiction? Understanding addiction, that it fundamentally changes the brain. It's a chronic disease, meaning it's not going to get better. So once they're addicted, that's why you do not want your child to ever cross that line. And they may use and abuse. Abusing drugs can lead to addiction. And I was in the service when I was in college. And did I binge drink? Yeah. Did we do a lot of that? But when we went out to sea, I didn't have to drink again. I could stop and come back, and yeah, I would abuse drugs and alcohol. But certain people cross the line. Certain people in their brain, when they do those things for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about shortly, cross over into addiction. It's a progressive disease. It'll get worse as they go over time, because the brain needs, if you understand addiction, and the brain needs to get higher because you reach a plateau, right? It clears out the dopamine in the brain, you reach a plateau, and you need to get that same high again. You've now got to take more. You've got to find or other drugs on top of it. So it changes their behavior and their thought process. It all becomes, once they cross the line into addiction, it all becomes about getting high, about getting that fix, getting that brain. And they will lie, and they will steal, and they will do anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean they don't love you, and that's what we've learned. It's not that they don't love you, it's not that they don't want to hurt you, but that drive, that compulsion is so powerful. And people at times don't understand that, and they get angry at the young person, the child, the sister, the brother, whatever. The other thing that these young people are dealing with, and just think of somebody that's in the middle school or high school, and think of what's going on in their brain. And my son changed. When he hit puberty, he changed. And we could clearly see. He was the loving, funny, intellectual, and great sense of humor. And when he hit puberty, all of a sudden it was changed. So was that a normal thing? Was that behavior where he closed himself off and wanted to get his hair cut oddly with his friends and hanging out with friends? And he changed. And so that's what's going on in their brain. And if you have any sort of mental illness, and it may be clinically diagnosed, but it could be subclinical, meaning there's something there, but it's not to the level where you have to actually take medication for it. My son had depression, he was on pills for that. That's a big risk factor, is if you have some form, and about 50% I think is the risk factor. Doesn't mean you're gonna do drugs, it just means that you have a higher risk factor. And also genetic predisposition. If you have alcoholism and drug addiction in the family, that's another risk factor. And you'll look at these families and you'll find that a number of people have those risk factors that did get addicted and moved on to drugs. So recreational users, people in high school that are out partying with their friends, and they get into this environment where you're drinking and smoking dope, and it makes it easy to take these pills. They don't really understand what they're doing. And for some people, everybody here can be addicted. We can all get addicted. It just depends on how much we take. We could all take the same dose over the same period of time, and we'll all get addicted. But somebody in this room will be addicted right away. And that's the risk factor. You don't know. You can look at your child. You can look at what's going on in their life. And we have, my wife joined a bereavement group that is comprised right now of about 14 mothers, and unfortunately it's growing. But it's all described in this magazine. So this is Renee, our friend. There's a number of people that are described in here about what they went through with their sons and daughters. But you look, there's a circuit court judge, there's a corrections officer, a nurse, school nurse. I mean, all these people, you'd think a school nurse would be on top of what's going on with these people. What will happen is they'll sorry, bear with me. What will happen is that in recreationally using these drugs, and all of a sudden they find that they feel this compulsion to continue to use that drug, whereas their friends haven't crossed that line, right? The other thing that's happening is the opiates that are used for injuries. So people will have an injury, they will start taking these pills, and before they know it, they will find themselves addicted. And you'll say, well, why, if they started feeling that way, why didn't they stop? Because if you understand addiction, what's happening with the brain is driving that compulsion for them to continue to do that behavior. And even though they may understand, we can sit here without taking it rationally, you can say, well, if I continue doing this, it's only going to get worse. Right? But the brain's not been screwed up. The brain has been fundamentally changed, and that's the way they're thinking. So they're not thinking that way. And what happens with part of what's going on in high school, the prefrontal cortex, we know it doesn't develop until you're fully developed, mature until you're in your early 20s. And this is what the young people are dealing with, the fact that that part of the brain is supposed to be helping, what it does, not supposed to be, what it does is helps you make decisions. It helps you evaluate the consequences of my actions. So they would say, when it's fully developed and you're all rational and you're sitting and looking at a situation and saying, well, if I continue to do this, I'm going to possibly get arrested, I'm possibly going to get addicted, I'm possibly going, and all these negative things. Well, that doesn't work. And the other thing that happens in addiction is it actually shuts that part of the brain down. So my son, we kept wondering why he seemed immature to us, even though he was in his late 20s, early 30s. And what happened was when you're addicted, when you're in the teenage years, that part of your brain doesn't develop. So it's actually still acting like you're thinking like a teenager. You're doing things where you have no impulse control. You're not rational in how you're evaluating the situations. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it shut that part of the brain down for him, so you wonder why people would continue to use and do things like that. Well, that part of the brain is supposed to help them figure all that out. It's now been shut down. It's just like a computer virus. It comes into your computer system, and the first thing it does is look for your security software and shut it down so it can go do what it wants. And that's essentially what's happened. That security software that's supposed to be helping protect you from these things, help you make those kind of decisions, has now been fundamentally changed. I cited Renee's son Renee's son, and I said this can happen to anybody. She's an executive in a pharmaceutical company. She understands drugs. Her son was in grad school. Her son was a fitness nut. He worked out all the time. He worried about what he put in his body. He was a health-conscious individual. He had a back injury when he started grad school. Thank you. When he started grad school, and he started taking opiate pills for that injury. And then he found himself addicted. But as I said, that brain has now been fundamentally changed, and you'd say, if he's a health nut, why in the world would he continue to do that? Because the brain has been changed, and that's what he wanted to do. That compulsion, it only got worse. And so the way it goes today is the fact that the pills are so expensive, and now finally the government and the pharmaceutical government is finally restricting these, and the doctors. So the pharmaceuticals companies, the doctors, the government, all of those are complicit in this flood of pills that we have out there. But they finally started cutting back on those, so they're harder to get. But you have this tremendous compulsion, and heroin is dirt cheap. It's like $10 a hit. You can get that, and you can have it delivered to your house. I mean, once you get into the network of people who know people, you can get whatever you want. They can deliver it to your house, as I said. Now that's why heroin is now, it takes the place of, it's the same thing. What I tell the students, they'll try these pills like Vicodin and Percocet. They'll try those, or Oxy, which is even more addicting. They'll try those pills, and without thinking, they'll say, but I'll never do heroin. Well, those pills are little heroin pills. They're little opiates. So you're already moving down the chain to do heroin. And they'll say, I'll never do heroin. And they say, well, you know you can just smoke it or snort it. You don't have to shoot it. And they'll do it, and they'll say, oh, this is great. But they'll be shooting it. And the progression, I don't know of anybody that we've talked to that has not snorted it or ingested heroin other than shooting up that isn't eventually shooting up. So, as I said, the big risk, the big unknown is what's inside that child's brain and how they're wired. And they don't know that. And that's what I tell the students is you don't understand the risk that you're taking. And once you get addicted, your life has been fundamentally changed, and your parents' and your family's life has been fundamentally changed forever. You can get better. The brain can heal itself to a large degree. It's called the plasticity of the brain. It can heal itself to a large degree. And that enables people to fight the disease, go to rehab, and continue to fight the disease, but they'll be dealing with it the rest of their lives. Those long-term memories, those neurons have been permanently changed. You have long-term memories in there that are going to drive you at certain situations, can drive you back to a relapse. And the cycle of relapse is real. And relapse, rehab, sometimes jail's thrown in there too. You watch these shows like 60 Minutes, Dateline, you watch all those shows. If you see something on, please watch it, anything. And they've done a good job. NPR has had a number of segments, 60 Minutes, Dateline, Nova on PBR. PBR? PBS. PBR is a beer, sorry. They've all done that. And what amazes me is the lack of understanding that these young people have about what they're doing. They'll interview these people, these young people, and they'll sit there and their lives are in front of them, and they'll say, I didn't know. I didn't know the connection of these pills to hair. I didn't understand how addictive these things are. I didn't understand what happens in my brain. Why am I like this? And they'll show you the cheerleaders, the athletes. So the message is, this can happen to anyone. You have to educate yourself so that you understand what's going on out there, so that you can watch the child's behavior, and you have to educate your children about what drug addiction is and have frank conversations about this, because they're not learning it anywhere else. There's a number of things that I just, in closing, would like to say relative to things that we've learned in talking with other people. You have to watch if there's any sort of mental disorders, and that could be some mild case of depression, anxiety disorder. But in high school, a lot of those things, people were feeling, am I feeling adequate? Am I extrovert, introvert? I'm dealing with some emotional issues in high school. I mean, those are all risks. Doesn't mean, again, none of this means absolute, but there is risk factors associated with this. Any injuries your children have, if they're on if they have ADD, ADHD, and they're on Ritalin, people sell those. They trade them, they'll snort them. So you have to control any under 18, you have a lot of leverage. Over 18, you start losing that leverage. You still have, you can still use some if they want to go to college, if you're trying to help them, if you're engaged with them in any way, you can still use some leverage. Control their medications, lock up all the medications in your home. Friends will come over, and although your child may not be involved, they'll go through your house, they'll go through anything and steal whatever they can find, alcohol, medications. Have the discussions, be observant, check their rooms. I can tell you, all of us, we've met so many people whose child has died. We can tell you, they'll all go back and say, well, I found this in the room, and I thought this was odd, and I kept finding these Q-tips and little cotton swabs and spoons, tabs from inhalants. But these red tabs were laying around. But anything, you have to be observant and check their pockets, check their rooms, check their cars. Just check. It doesn't hurt. I'd rather, somebody's done in one of those shows, they said, hey, I'd rather have a ticked off child than a dead child or an addicted child. So be upset with me, but yeah, I'm gonna check things. But as I said, listen to your gut. Any problems they have with, if they're dealing with, they go to an underage drinking party, there's some marijuana issues, anything like that, you want to really take that as the tip of the iceberg and see what's underneath, and don't just assume like we did that that's just behavior, that may be adolescent behavior, teenage behavior. And you have to worry all the way through college, because I can tell you a number of our people that we are now part of the family of people who've lost someone. They thought they made it through high school, but they got into college, and here they are. They're wonderful students who wanted to be doctors, die of heroin overdose or a pill overdose. So it's all the way through. Thank you. That's all I have. Is there any questions? Well, if you think about it.
We'll questions to the end.
Oh, for the end?
Yeah,
Okay.
after that. Thank you, Don.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pejman.